Hello, I'm Teresa Krasny, a board member of ICRA. For our last session today, I'm absolutely delighted to introduce a legend in the field of British sculpture. Madeleine Bessborough opened her first gallery over 60 years ago. Today, on a beautiful piece of English countryside, she has created an extraordinary environment for sculptors to show their work, to experiment with materials, and to test the limits of their practice. So I hope you have a glass of wine or a cup of coffee in your hand and sit back and enjoy this fireside chat between Madeleine Bessborough and Dalley.
Madeleine, it's such a beautiful day here at Roche Court. We've had to actually close the shutters to keep the sun out. Who would believe that? Extraordinary.
No, yes.
I wanted to ask you about how this amazing place all came about. Can we go right back to a long time ago when you were a younger woman and
certainly was
starting out? I mean, you were such a pioneer as a woman gallerist in London 60 years ago.
It was 1959.
1959.
So my maths are rather bad, but it was quite a long time ago. But I had an idea to have a gallery that would help artists get established after they'd left art school, because in those days, the Arts Council hadn't really got going. There was no help. You were lucky enough to get a place in art school, and then you had 3 glorious years, and then you were out in a year. And there were 1 or 2 rather grand galleries in London with velvet curtains and things. And there wasn't really any. It was Jenny Lee who went to the Arts Council who said we must do more if we've got good art education. Anyway, I had this idea to have a small gallery to help young artists. And it's a great lesson, I think, to everybody today, because I knew no one. I wasn't in the art world at all. My father was a soldier, and so I was in a completely different world. And somebody gave me a list of who might help, because I didn't have a beam. And so the list consisted of Kenneth Clark, or frankly random, Robin Darwin, Kenneth Clark, who ran the National Gallery in those days, Robin Darwin, who ran the Royal College of Art, John Rosenstein, who ran the Tate. I mean, you can't, it was just, it was the grandest list you could possibly make. And I wrote in rather childish hand what my idea was. And they all said, and I said, could I come and see you? And they all said yes. Now, which in a way, nowadays, if you imagine writing, well, I'm sure that it probably would be similar with some people today, but not many. They all said, come and see me. And Kenneth Clark gave me an hour and a half and said, this is a very good idea. And he was head of, in those days, he was head of the Arts Council, because he'd left the National Gallery. And he said, it would be a very good idea, it's what's needed, and of course I'll help him. If I can't help him money, but I can help being a trustee. Robin Darwin, exactly the same at Royal College, just what our students need. And so there was a great group of luminaries who were very helpful. And then we found somebody who was in what was called the rag trade, who came and said that sounded like a good idea and it would be good for his name and good for his clothes. So he'd back it. So we got premises in Sloane Street, which in those days was it had been bombed quite badly at the bottom of the Sloane Street, but we were at the top. And it was all shops that were to do with domestic. You could get your lamp mended, you could buy your lunch. It was a lovely domesticated street. There was a pet shop around the corner. You can't imagine it today, but it was a lovely community. We got our small shop, and I had a partner called Carol Winnery, she was called in those days, who'd been working on The Nude, which was the book that Kenneth Clark had written the year before. And she was very bright and we got on very well. And we had our first opening. We got we wrote to all the students from colleges and said, come and can we see your work? And then we had a lovely little group choosing the first exhibition. And it was a great success. And we got a lot of publicity and we sold, everybody was thrilled. And it went on for years and staggering on in Sloane Street. And of course, the costs of London went up and up. And we then decided that we couldn't go on and got to the 90s. So we'd been there several years. And I was always interested in sculpture, but of course the premises were completely unsuitable. I remember showing a big Henry Moore sculpture, which was a wonderful figure on a sort of catafalque. And when we came in the next morning, it had descended into the basement because the whole shop had collapsed. So it was, and I always loved Barbara Hepworth's work, and we used to show whenever we found work that it was always good to show the old with the new. The young got bored with showing with the young, and they wanted to show with their predecessors.
So you made a mixture,
yes, a mixture of
periods and styles and everything else.
And we showed people like rather sort of trendy people like Andrew Logan and Dennis and Derek Jarman, and so it became quite a centre of what was going on.
Well, by then, the whole explosion of Chelsea has been,
yes,
the full swinging London phenomenon
yes,
had happened with Mary Quant and all the fashion
yes,
and designers and everything else, and you were there all along.
We were there at the top, just there, and it was fun, and I think it was important that artists felt that we were part of a movement that was going forward, that we were always looking forward to the next thing. And I remember when we had the Derek Jarman and Andrew Logan show, they fell out the day before, meant to be a joint show. And Derek walked up and down Sloane Street with a sandwich board on his back saying, "Don't go in." So little things like that sort of stick in your memory. And they were made, the art world was such an alive place. And it was so interesting and fun. But times were moved on and we couldn't, the estate, Cadogan estate, were going to develop that parade of shops and we couldn't possibly afford it to stay. So by that time, I was married and we was married to a farmer in Ireland and he decided to sell up in Ireland and come to England. So we bought this place called Roche Court, which is quite near London. It's in Wiltshire, but it's got, actually the M3 didn't exist when we bought it, so it was quite more cut off. Yeah. And the idea was to show sculpture because that's what really was needed, and we didn't have an indoor space. So, and we were lucky enough that Alan Bowness, who then ran the Hepworth estate, it was a time after Barbara had died, and he said, "Would you like to have some monumental work and organise exhibitions?" So we said, "Of course." So for 2 blissful years, we had nothing but the great monumental works of Hepworth, which needed to be dispersed to various museums. And so that was very exciting. And then from that, we decided to show younger people again, because that was always in our DNA. And we, of course, all the sculptors were younger. Richard Long, Anthony was just sort of beginning, not quite, and we put together really, it's a wonderful piece of geography here. It stretches 20 miles to Southampton, and it's a sloping due south, and it's never been messed around with because it's not a grand place at all, but it's got lovely sloping fields going down, so you could get different levels to show things. And we've built on from there, really. That's what it is. It was said enough, I think, but it's...
well, it's a magnificent creation you've made here, and you've, of course, added galleries and beautiful artist house, which is a showcase for smaller work, and so much. What about when you first took on showing sculpture outdoors? There must have been an awful lot of issues with with conservation, with just the handling of such pieces. You must have had to learn an awful lot about all that, or did you have wonderful technicians to help?
No,
I can imagine you didn't.
My husband was a very good, very intelligent, very interesting farmer, and he bought himself a teleporter to move his hay and all sorts of things. So they proved to be absolutely the perfect way to move large monumental works. And the people working here became so skilled in slinging Hepworth or slinging Tony Caros or whatever it was, because if you're careful of things, it's all about care and knowing the risks. And so we worked out various places where you could show work. And while we were doing all this, I've always been very interested in education. I suppose you could say, the beginning of the gallery about a place for young people. And so we started a Roche Educational Trust, which was so that when we put works in the park, schools could come and see them and groups could be brought around and have a look. And our mantra became looking, thinking, speaking. And we put together a very intelligent girl called Lucy Salisbury, who drew up a sort of, I suppose, a manifesto of what we were trying to do. And so our educational program grew at the same time as the sculpture. And we found, which is so interesting to me, was that artists, of course, loved it because the world had changed very quickly. And instead of being able to teach, the whole educational system had changed. When I first started, everybody taught who came out of art school. And if you were good and interesting, you got a job teaching so many days a week somewhere. And that paid the bills. Nowadays, it then became that the teaching unions didn't like that. They wanted professional teachers as opposed to artists. So that all dried up. And so artists never met future generations. They never talked to students. It wasn't part of there was no way that they could do that unless they went back to art schools. So I remember, for instance, Richard Long here talking to 100 sixth formers one sunny evening, and they loved it. I mean, it was part of somebody who was actually doing something, and there was his work. Why did he do it? And it was a true learning process for both them and us. So that was, and it's grown from there.
Well, we'll talk more in a minute, actually, about articulation and your wonderful programme. But just to go back to the trials and tribulations and joys of sculpture in the outdoors, we were chatting earlier. I was fascinated by you saying that you thought there was a lot of threat to sculpture because materials have changed so much.
Yes.
And because of the ways that people are making things, presumably when you were first dealing with Hepworth and other artists in that generation, they were making their sculptures specifically to be outdoors and to last forever, really. Whereas now it's not quite the same, is it?
No, it isn't. It isn't a way. I mean, they all have a vision of being part of many generations to come, as we all do, in different professions. But I think, if you go right back, most outdoor sculpture was carvings and it was marble and it had an infinite life in certain respects. Then people started to make bronze casting, and bronze has quite a long life, and the way it was treated in the early days. Then people started to cut corners and it wasn't made as well, things weren't cast as well. Then, of course, iron came into the people's work, materials they could work with. And what is very interesting is I think one of the fascinating things about how history and art and sculpture and everything all reflect each other, that, for instance, Henry Moore, when he was, after the war, when he was at his most sought after, and the British government it was the Arts Council, the British Council, organising exhibition in sculpture in Japan and everywhere. The things were all cast in Germany. Now, because they weren't cast in England, because under the restrictions, there was rationing of steel up till 59, I think, or 58. So it meant that all the refineries here,
Foundries.
Foundries. It didn't have the material.
Oh.
And all therefore their skills, all their craftsmen had disappeared. So we were it was very unusual to be able to cast work in British Isles. In fact, you couldn't. There was one small, very interesting little foundry in Chelsea called Farini's, where small things were cast, but you couldn't do big work. Mm. And then, so Seuss in Berlin was I think they were called Seuss in Berlin was the great foundry wherever we were.
But you've had some extremely ambitious outdoor installations here. I'm thinking of Philida Barlow.
Yes,
who came to you.
We're so lucky to have her as part of our artistic life. I think she's an amazing force for good. She's a woman who was much loved when she taught at the Slade, and talked to lots of people who said she had a real brilliant teacher. And we asked her when she stopped teaching, wasn't quite so good, she'd had her children, could she do a big installation here? And we've got wonderful trees. We've got a wonderful home oak, which God knows how tall and very, very sort of statuesque. Well, how about doing something in connection with that outside? And she made a beautiful stage with strange pom-poms coming from the thing, and she had lots of painted chairs. And people loved it. And then in the gallery itself, we had about 5 sculptures, and it did very well. Everybody loved it. Everybody loved her. We had a lecture. We had everything. It was a real hurrah, and people came from all.
What were the pom-poms made of?
They were made of tissue paper and materials. They were something like from the rag trade.
Sort of rubbish, yes.
Yes, just rubbish,
scraps,
all put together. You know how you can make a ball by
tying. Yes, I know that.
So
but wasn't it rained?
Yes, of course it rained, and some of them fell apart slightly, but the painted chairs survived very well. And then after the show finished, over the painted chairs, there were 60 of them. She said, "Oh, what are we to do?" So I said, "We'll sell them." And so we sold them for very little, 60 quid, I think. And so lots of artists bought them because you could put them on the wall. You could have them as a sort of installation on the wall. And so they all went. And then in the gallery, we sold 4 to real collectors, important collectors, which were going to be part of a sort of mini museum. And but there were 2 left over. So I rang Philida and said, we've organised a band to bring them back. I'm so sorry, we haven't got any storage. And she said, "Oh dear, what do you mean?" So I said, "Well, the 2 we didn't sell, I'm sending back." She said, "Oh, don't do that. Put them on the farm. Put them on the rubbish." She said, they're all made of rubbish. This is quite interesting because they're all made of found objects. Mm-hmm. And why not? So I said, "Philida, just grow up." I said, "I've spent a long time. And the show is wonderful. Everybody loved it. What do people think if I put it all on a bonfire afterwards? You're a serious artist, and the world is a serious place, and serious money." Anyway, so, I think we all take ourselves too seriously.
She was an early exponent of recycling.
Yes, she was, exactly. Completely.
But not many artists think of their work as being as ultimately recyclable as that.
But she's such a wonderful person and it helps so many people. And
yes, but I know that you have, in making the place here and in doing what you do, and with your very, very imaginative take on showing work, you've really changed people's practice. I mean, tell us a little bit about Edmund de Waal, his pots.
Edmund, I don't know, the stories, it's rather like, I don't know, I feel like old Mother Hubbard. But I met Edmund just after my husband died. I was asked to stay by the very sweet Dean of Canterbury. And he just moved into Canterbury. He had no pictures. So he said, come and help me. I've got nothing. And I've got a young couple coming to stay who've got 3 children. And you like children. So I said, yes, that's fine. So the young couple was Sue and Edmund and their 3 children. Oh. And we rattled around in this completely empty, vast building just outside Canterbury, or in the cathedral. And Edmund's such an interesting man. He's got such an interesting mind. And in those early days, how the plastic, how the 3-dimensional could add to his way of looking at life. Anyway, he made these wonderful pots, and they were all sort of individual. And I said, well, we've just made a gallery. We've just commissioned a space so that people can see things indoors. But it's long and thin, and I don't think we can show individual pots. They wouldn't look right. So why not put them in groups? Put them together in groups. So that was one of the first exhibitions he had, when they were all together in groups. And then, of course, being Edmund, he designed these wonderful latrines, and he's now gone and he shows all over the world. He shows in America and the Frick. He did a wonderful intervention in the Frick in New York, and he's done a wonderful... His first intervention was at Waddesdon with that extraordinary collection of objects. And so he's moved, and he's written this book, and he's got a show. He's written about 4 books about porcelain and about his life and about how he fits into the history of the world. And his family have fit into the history of the world in such an incredibly interesting way.
Mm-hmm. But Roche plays a big part in that, because it was obviously a pivotal moment when he sort of saw a different thing, and that's what a great gallerist does. So you don't have
it's love. I think it's about communication. It's about looking. It's about looking, thinking, and speaking. And people, if you go to an art gallery, you've got to teach your children to look and sort of put it back into their minds. And what does it remind you of Mrs. Tittlemouse? And or what does it remind you of? And what is it part of? And so that you understand how all the things we do are linked. I think all man's invention, everything is linked. And I mean, for instance, at Chatsworth, they've got the engine. They've got the first jet engine, because the OD was involved with, I think it was Frank Whittle who designed the first jet engine, and he was given the sort of prototype, which he had in I don't know, very storage, but it's at Chatsworth now, and you can see it. And that is it's a beautiful art object. And, and what's jet travel? That was the beginning of jet travel, the beginning of so many things. And art and looking at things are all fun. And it always upsets me when you go into a big museum and you see all these children with their, probably on the floor with their bottoms in the air, with their clipboards, drawing. Now, it's not about drawing, it's about talking. They're probably only there for half an hour. Mm-hmm. And of course they would make a noise, but they all ought to be saying, what's that, and somebody ought to be telling them, because they're only there probably for a short while. And you can draw anywhere. And just, I think that's a waste of time for children. Yeah. I think it's all about speaking, hence.
So you think the drawing, but you don't think that the drawing is a different kind of interaction?
I think it's a very good interaction, but it takes a long time. And I think you get, if you've got children only there for an hour or an hour and a half, something, you oughtn't to waste it doing something like that. You ought to stretch your connection with them and talk about it, because nobody's going to talk to them about it anywhere else. And I think talking is such an important, and that's what COVID is so sad, because people don't, they just look, they don't.
Well,
they're not asked questions.
That's true. Well, talking of talking, tell us about articulation.
Well, that's what we are very proud about, because that was started, it actually was started at Winchester, the school. And because Kenneth Clark went to Winchester, they had the idea of talking, because there was a wonderful program called Civilization, which everybody, I'm sure, you remember, but I do, which was absolutely pivotal in communication about art.
And about culture on television. Actually.
Yes,
the idea
exactly.
That television could be a real medium.
Yes, which people really enjoyed, and it wasn't educational. It was just something that was just as good as many, I don't know,
series of lectures or whatever. Yes.
Yeah.
So articulation began as a school project at
Winchester.
Okay.
And then and I went to it and I thought it was wonderful. And it was the idea of the children, one by one, talking about any art subject they wanted, art, architecture, anything that caught their imagination, for 10 minutes using PowerPoint. So they had to give little mini lectures. Mm. And I thought it was wonderful. And they were, of course, all the children were incredibly clever. And I thought, what a shame that it's not done further. Why don't we do it here? Mm. So we did it for state schools here. We did it in the hall. And then after that, we got slightly more sophisticated, had a hut that we lived in. And we got very good people to adjudicate it. And you had to just, we had about, 10 children at a time.
So it was a competition.
A competition.
Yes,
it's a competition.
So their job was to look at a piece and talk about it?
Yes, look, think and speak about it.
But was it a piece that was...
No, it could be anywhere. It could be your granny's watercolours, or it could be anything.
Okay.
And because it made it sort of more, because there were a lot of boys from abroad, so there were a lot of subjects that influenced them from where they came from. And it got bigger and bigger, and then somebody asked us to do it in other schools, and we then stretched all over the country. And then we got, the Sainsbury's gave us some wonderful cash to get it going. Sainsbury family are amazing. They have done more for culture in this country than practically any other family, I think.
It's amazing.
And they ended up by the National Gallery, that one, giving money for the wing. For the wing, but all their philanthropy is enormously used. I think the next generation, I'm sure, will carry on, but their philanthropy was enormously thoughtful towards the arts. So they gave us money to go round the country and build this up. And so we went to the great thing. The other thing that failed was that there was lots of towns in Britain had decided to build educational or attach educational units to their museums. But it's quite a difficult thing to do, to get the local, it's all a matter of timing, to get local schools to be involved in your local museum. But articulation became quite an easy thing to do, because you could just get the children. It was a competition, and they didn't have to be away from their school for very long, and they could rehearse it. So it stretched from Truro to Stirling to everywhere, which is really, and I'm thrilled. And we've done it in Singapore. We've done it. It's becoming sort of almost not quite global, but it's becoming a very good, cheap way of engaging. I think 16-year-olds are the best into being able to talk and to be able to express themselves and to be able to learn to look. And we're very thrilled because it's grown from here, which is a sort of garage in Wiltshire, with 3 or 4 people working on it, to the National Gallery are taking it on.
That's
so it's
wonderful.
Going to be attached to the National Gallery. So that we're thrilled about that.
So it'd be a truly national scheme.
Yes. Yeah. And it's a good way of, I think the National Gallery is wonderful.
Well, such congratulations, Madeleine. That's really amazing. It's a huge thing, and it's a great legacy for Roche and for everything you've done here and continue to do.
Well, it's for art. It's for sculptors.
Yes.
It's for sculptors. And I know that this program is supposed to be about sculpture, but it's about its place, I suppose, in our culture. And I think there are so many interesting things that is happening in sculpture today, that people can think of it as being not anything that they can get involved with. I think.
Well, you and what you've done here, I mean, some great artists who concentrated mainly on painting have been encouraged into the three-dimensional realm, I think, by just thinking, goodness, look at that garden, I'd like to have something there.
It's giving it distance, isn't it?
Yes. Michael Craig Martin perhaps was one.
He's such a great man, actually, Michael, and he's such a great communicator. And
another fantastic teacher.
Fantastic teacher. And again, he came here, rather like Richard came here, and we had lots of schools, and it got very late. It was a summer's evening, and they all lay we had rugs on the grass, and Michael was just outside the gallery, and he spoke about being an artist and why he was, and what it meant in your life, and how you could communicate, all the things that write about it. And they were all absolutely spellbound. And then it got very late, and the teachers kept saying, we're going to miss our training. And we eventually had to break it up. And everybody was coming streaming past us saying, yeah, I wanted to ask him this. And did you hear what he said about that? And it was just he's an amazing man. He has this capacity in a very slow way, to communicate. And just for people to say, that's what I want to do. So he did drawings in the sky. I said, why not make some drawings in the sky and sculpture? So,
and what are his sculptures made of?
They're made of corten.
Corten steel, yes.
And painted.
Yes.
And that lasts.
Yes, and now you see them everywhere. And
yes.
It's stunning. Talking of Chatsworth, I love that pink stiletto
wonderful shoe. I know, brilliant. See that?
Rather went with the very kind of overdressed atmosphere of that kind of architecture.
Yeah, I know. But it's wonderful because they're contemporary images. But what is so extraordinary is that we have one piece here by Michael, which is so old-fashioned because it's of objects, and there's a bunch of keys. Well, nobody has a bunch of keys anymore, do we? We all cards. It's of sort of coffee pot. It's sort of sandals that people use. It's a light bulb. Well, nobody uses those sort of light bulbs anymore. So
I know he did some early mobile phones, didn't he? And they already look like these sort of strange, clunky brick things.
Yes, I know.
But that's all part of the. It's all part of what he's recording about contemporary life.
Yes, I know.
So, what have you got at the moment? What's here? Tell us. And how do you select? I mean, do you do it
people
personally?
come to us and we ask younger artists, and then people who've got pieces of sculpture that they probably are too big for where their lives have moved on. But then one of the interesting pieces we've got is a Kenneth Martin sculpture, which is a very tall, sort of vertical shape of
It's like a stack, isn't it?
Yes, it's like a stack of cards, and I found it it was on the harbour in Portsmouth, and what had happened is there'd been an exhibition, and the man who had organised it had gone bankrupt, and the sculpture had been everybody taken their bits, and it had been dispersed everywhere. And then this enormous piece, nobody knew what to do with. So I think probably a scrap merchant in Portsmouth took it, and it was on the harbour. And somebody rang me up and said, this is something that they say is sculpture. Would you be interested? I went down. Of course, it was this amazing Kenneth Martin, which had been commissioned by the Stuyvesant Foundation for when there were competitions for sculpture in public places in the 70s. And it had been in Sheffield, the centre of Sheffield. It had been in the Battersea Park. It had been in all sorts of places. And of course, there was a great interest in Kenneth and Mary Martin in those days, constructivist. And we were very proud of them. They showed all over Europe. And so this piece had really I had it here, we had it restored. And within about 3 weeks, an American, very clever Englishman who'd gone to America and was building up a collection of sculpture, bought it, and so it went whistling off to California until we thought, well, that's it. We never see it again. It's lovely to think of it in a good sculpture park. Anyway, long and the short of it is that the sculpture park has been dispersed because there was a fire in Napa Valley. And this piece wasn't touched, but he's now getting on. Remains a very great friend and really nice man. And he said, would you like to, I think I'd love to, I got to disperse my collection. So I said, I'd love to have it back. So that's slightly quaking about how much it would cost to bring to California. And when we bought it from California, we're going to have it back here. And the whole of his family and everybody who's written books about him and museums in Germany are thrilled because it's a really iconic, wonderful piece, which has gone to, my grandmother used to tell me a thing which a riddle. I went to India and I stopped there and I came back because I never went there. And she used to scream with laughter. And of course, it's a watch. It's the riddle. It says it's like a sculpture. Anyway.
Yes. And where are you going to put it?
We're going to put it as you come in, where it was before, actually. As you come in on the drive,
yes.
There's a drive going down to the Catalogue, and it's going to be just on the corner there, next to Bill Woodrow's cannon.
The cannon is very fine.
It's lovely.
The cannon is wonderful. That'll be a beautiful place.
Yes, I think
yes.
The two things go well.
The cattle are very important here. They are a beautiful.
They're a very important part of the sculpture park.
They are.
There's lots of people, lots of children who don't know what they are really, and we've just won the first prize and the cup for the best small herd in the south of England.
No,
of limousine cattle.
That's absolutely true.
So we've had them for years, and we love them, and we look after them, and we take great care of them. But we never thought that they were sort of prize winning, but they're limousine.
They've always looked rather as if you've curated them, actually, for their beautiful colour, because they go exactly the same. They're sort of ready.
Yes, they're
russet colour. They're Corten steel, actually, aren't they?
Rusted Corten.
When you get that
Gormley colour.
They are. They're the colour of a Gormley when it's been outdoors for a while. Oh yes, well that's a marvellous story. And you did have, I don't know if you still have that, very tall Barry Flanagan, which is in the
acrobats.
The acrobats, yes.
That's gone to California.
Has it?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We had a wonderful Tony Caro piece, but 3 sort of pillars of Corten steel on a concrete base, which our Catalogue game used to use as a sort of shed in the winter. And Tony didn't mind it. So, and then eventually it's gone to a very good collection in Kentucky. So that's exciting. So things move around, and it isn't only the great names, it's also the younger people who show here.
Well, you had another. You showed me those beautiful Hepworths that have returned here after many years.
I know. Well, we came from America. They're part of the family of man. There's this wonderful group that she did, which there's a full group at the York Sculpture Park. And then there's a group at PepsiCo in New York. And then there were 3 other groups which were broken up. I may get the slight numbers wrong, but this collection in America bought 3 of them. And so we've got Ancestor, which is a lovely, solid piece, layer upon there. And we've got Parent, which is a rather, she looks like a pregnant, rather old granny. And then we've got Youth, which is a lovely sort of slim piece. So the 3 of them together. And they are amazing because they are the family of man, what you came from, what you are, and what you are, what you're going to be.
And you mentioned younger artists. How do you how do you find the younger artists? Everybody's always interested in this.
Yeah, I know.
Where do you
Well,
just,
there are.
I mean, I know you go to a lot of galleries because I see you everywhere. You've got the most amazing energy, man.
No, I haven't. But I've got very good people working now, interested in Roche, and they all put their spies out. And no, I think younger artists come here quite a lot. And your daughter's got a wonderful gallery.
She doesn't have anything of your sort of scale, but she's a little bit like you were all those years ago.
No, I think she's amazing. And
but the scene is very different now, of course.
Yes, of course.
Massive galleries, and a lot of them now started by young women.
Yes,
a lot, which is a very different from your day.
Completely.
Were you virtually the only one?
Well, yes, I sort of know. There was Angela Flowers, and there were one or two others, but there weren't very many women. And I remember when I was on, Robin got me involved in the council of the Royal College, and there were 2 women, and I don't know, 30 men. People used to say, well, I said, no. I think women have always made a mistake by thinking that they're different. They're not. If you just have an idea, you just are yourself and you talk, and you're not intimidated by your surroundings. And I think a lot of it's made up by people wanting to draw attention to themselves. I say to my grandchildren that they have such a tough life. They don't. If you just are yourself and you care about things outside yourself.
Well, Madeleine, is there anything you would have liked to talk about that we didn't talk about? Because what's really important is that you said...
No, I think the important thing is that the commercial world of art should get more involved in education. I do. It always worries me when you go into a beautiful gallery in Bermondsey or something and you see a Tracy Emin show and there are you and 2 other people are looking at it and you hear the children coming out of school just down the road. I think the commercial world ought to be more involved in its younger audience. I do. It may not pay and it may not pay the bills, but it's what you need in a society, that we all pay our bill, we all do our bit to the next generation.
If there were any super special pieces that you wanted just to talk about?
Well, at the moment we're very proud of the Hepworth's family of man.
Oh, that's lovely.
They really do look wonderful. We've got an orangery, which is an 18th century square unit, which is beautiful to show things in. And we have a Russian artist, sculptor called Nika Nikolova, and she has taken demolished buildings and taken the banisters from demolished buildings and has joined them all together in these 3 absolutely amazing sculptures, which we've got in the orangery. And that, to me, is everything. She's Russian, she's from another culture, she's taken something from our culture, which we're disposing of, and she's made it into the most beautiful, beautiful shapes. And each sculpture has this feeling of patination, of people hauling themselves up on the banisters of a beautiful building, time immemorial. So we've certainly got those.
Yes, we didn't really even have a chance to talk about the lovely gallery in the garden, and there's so much here to talk about. But
the galleries are good because we took a student and commissioned him to do our first gallery. He's called Stephen Marshall, and he was Scottish, and then he'd gone to America and studied at Harvard. Then he came back, and we asked, when we did the gallery here, we asked all the grand architects whether they'd like to do a small space to show things indoors. And I remember asking Norman Foster, and we asked Richard Rogers. It was so childish in those days. And they were all at the top of their profession. They came down, they said, what a lovely idea. We'd love to build a small gallery for sculpture. And then they said, what's your budget? And when I said 60,000, they said, very nice, but not actually for us at this stage. You need a student. Mm-hmm. So we got a student, and he came down and he drew it out, and for 60,000. We built the building, all on budget, and we won the first Stephen Lawrence Award from the RIBA as the best small building in Britain. So that was a nice sort of finish to our, and we've always used him. He's built the most beautiful buildings here. Mm-hmm. I think the mistake people use about architecture, about everything actually, is they skip from one architect to another. They see a building they like and they say, come and build our I don't know, greenhouse or whatever it is, our extension. And so you end up with a mishmash. Every modern extension, which we've got several here, have all been by Stephen, and they all have the same language. They all have a lot of glass, and they have a lot of wood, and the balance of the two. And so the whole of Roche has another generation of sculpture, of architecture on it, and I think that works well.
It certainly works beautifully with the sculpture, because they're very sculptural as creations, aren't they?
Yes, they are.
And recently, amazing, because do you remember I came here during when you were closed, just for a walk, and we could see the Tess Jarrah exhibition from outside, because this wonderful gallery in the garden means that you can actually stand in the garden and look into the gallery, because it's long and thin with an entire glass wall.
Yeah.
Really.
I know, and of course that was designed entirely by Stephen. He said, we're a nation of window shoppers, and I'm going to give you a window shop.
So nice.
It's when architecture and when people of great vision can get together, like Stephen and I mean he's doing several works. He's doing a big one for the Maggie Foundation, and anybody would be lucky to be in one of his buildings.
In your 60 years, which are by no means over yet, you've made such an incredible contribution to.
And that's not. I mean, I've done what I wanted to do, and I just feel that, particularly now, strangely enough, being outdoors is very important. To being able to see things and experience culture outside, not necessarily in buildings and things, because I think the next few years are going to continue to be hounded by this situation we're in. And it teaches people to have a wider view.
Well, to be able to go for a walk and look at beautiful things. And you've been so generous, because you kept your gardens open to the local public all through lockdown. You were allowed to, because it just can't see a lovely place.
Well, we had to go to court. I mean, we had to get council's opinion to do it, because people kept saying, oh, you can't do that, you're going against it, whatever. And I said, I think it's much more important that people have the opportunity to keep socially distanced, but stretch their legs and look at culture and look at interesting things and have something outside themselves. And we do get a lot, but you have to book in. Just say what your name is.
Say you're coming.
Yeah, and we have a car park and things. But we've never had a cafe. We've never had, we're just something to look at. And that's it. I think we're not trying to make money out of selling buns, because we couldn't. I can't do that. I'm not good at it.
Well, somebody here makes pretty brilliant biscuits. I've been eating them all morning. Madeleine, it's always wonderful to talk to you, but this has been really
Jan,
special.
you're so much part of all our lives, because you are such a communicator. I read every word that I see. I do. I think they're wonderful.
Roche Court is a unique place. It really is completely unique and
good bit of geography.
Good bit of geography. All right, we'll leave it there. If you just want to say it's a good bit of geography and won't allow me to give you any other compliments, and all we can say is that Roche Court is a very good bit of geography.